Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report.
Now to a historic indictment in New York City. Mayor Eric Adams is resisting calls to step down after federal prosecutors laid out explosive corruption charges against him in a 57-page court document. Adams, a Democrat and former police captain, is now the city's first mayor to be charged with federal crimes, including bribery. And he could face a judge as early as tomorrow to enter a plea.
This is someone, for context, not only the mayor of New York City, this incredible institution of a city when it comes to this country, but also someone who just a couple of years ago when he was elected was being touted. He touted himself as the future of the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. He was presenting himself as the person who best represented the path forward for the Democratic Party. He is now being indicted
and he was
for
a police
what
officer.
Sounds like public corruption. And he was a police officer.
Oh, say it ain't true. It just can't be. How is it possible that Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD has been indicted on 5 federal charges related to bribery, wire fraud, conspiracy, and soliciting campaign contributions from foreign nationals? No. This is a man who dedicated his life, such as it is, to upholding the law. This is a man who has taken a number of oaths to the people of New York City and to the law that he was supposed to be upholding. This is a man who knows the law, obeys the law, lectures black people about obeying the law. So surely this must be a case of mistaken identity. Yeah, that's the ticket. That must be what this is. Mistaken identity, because surely Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD would never be involved in any sort of dirty dealings. Now, back in November of last year, I posted a Sunday address about Marilyn Mosby and Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD, both of whom were in the news at the same time because Mosby had just been convicted of 2 counts of perjury, and at the same time that was happening, it was announced that Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD has been investigated by the feds for taking gifts and bribes from foreign nationals. So they were already telegraphing that this was coming down the pike. And it smells to me like somebody at the DOJ must have leaked something, because this month there's been a rapid succession of city officials in New York resigning, from the police commissioner to the head of the school system, which all had the telltale signs of rats leaving a sinking ship. So obviously people around Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD knew that the other shoe was just about to drop, and here it is dropping right on his empty head. Yesterday, federal agents showed up at the mansion of the mayor around 6 o'clock a.m. with a search warrant and duffel bags. They came to get any phones or tablets with information regarding Turkish interests who the feds alleged were giving Adams money illegally. And while at the mayor's mansion, the feds gave Adams a summons, telling him the obvious, that he had been indicted. Last week, Officer Adams and his attorneys met with senior Justice Department officials in a last-ditch effort to try to head all this off. But clearly, like all bootlicks, white power decided that he was more useful to them disgraced than in office. Now, the accusations against him go back before he was mayor, and that it mostly has to do with how his mayoral campaign was funded. See, Officer Adams' candidacy wasn't grassroots. That was his first sin. His candidacy was pure astroturf. And of course, the white powers that be that have the ability to give you everything also have the power to take it away, and they always do. And since these accusations go back so many years before he became mayor, well, let's just say that in my opinion, it's no coincidence that it was U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, the same guy who the DOJ had in front of the cameras announcing the charges against Puff Daddy. He was the one announcing the charges against Officer Adams. And of course, when they went after Puff Daddy, they also did it with old information from years back. Yeah, that's how they operate. They keep that dirt on these bootlicks, keep it in their back pocket, holding on to it for the day when they know they're going to use it, and they always do. White power never puts these bootlicks and self-serving bougie Negroes in these positions without also having the goods on them, because that ensures that when the time comes to remove them, they'll be able to run them out the paint no matter what the bootlick thinks of it. Even if they claim that the accusations made against Eric Adams don't constitute crimes, which is what Officer Adams' lawyers are claiming, at the very least, just like Puff Daddy, Officer Adams will still have to concede that what the feds are saying he did is what actually happened. Now, he can claim, well, it's not a crime, but he has to admit, well, yeah, what they're saying is basically factual, and for a lot of folks, that'll be the end of it. Okay, so you're admitting to it. And to think, all these years, Officer Eric Adams was sitting here yucking it up for white power. Every photo that you had of him, especially on the campaign trail, was him with that big toothy grin of his, that crap-eating grin. And he's sitting here putting on the smile. Look at these pearly whites. And he just knew that they were so amused and loved him so much. And this is what they're showing him. He played the fool for them. He went from being the city's top official to now being the latest criminal defendant. And it's no surprise at all that Officer Eric Adams has gone from wagging his finger at the black community and saying that the system basically is a good system to now he's saying this thing is all corrupt and crooked. Look how they're coming after me. This is just so wrong. Yeah, now all of a sudden he doesn't believe in the infallibility of the system anymore. He's not a champion of the system. Not anymore. Yeah, the exact same presumption of guilt that people like Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD rely on in order to make sure that they can get their way in court, and the white media can claim, people just trust the police, they just trust the authorities. Yeah, well, now they're doing it to him. Now, as of this recording, Officer Eric Adams hasn't been arrested, nor has he voluntarily surrendered, reports being that a date for him to turn himself in hasn't been established as yet. In fact, he's announced that he's going to be fighting to clear his name. So I guess that means he won't be resigning, though that hasn't stopped a number of Democrats from trying to vote him off the island, pun intended. Ocasio-Cortez, Miss Horseface herself, is demanding that Officer Adams resign. And I'll bet that she's got some fellow Puerto Rican that she'd like to see take his place. No honor among sleaze. They're not even waiting for this guy to decide to jump. Far as they're concerned, he needs to just be pushed. And the white media is busy doing their job, which is stacking the deck against this guy. They're not even leaving it up to the imagination about ways to get him out of office, because he's already made it clear he's not going to be resigning. So that being the case, the white media is saying, let's go ahead and publicly brainstorm ways to have him removed. Let's put that into the public. Oh, public, did you know that the governor, she can go ahead and just remove him on her own? Did you know she can do that? And also, the city charter in New York has the ability for what's called an inability commission. They can go ahead and just put their heads together and gang up on him and have him removed. You don't have to wait for him to resign. You can just go ahead and shove him out on your own. They're putting that out there into the public to create the expectation that if Eric Adams refuses to resign, then the other politicians out there need to go ahead, circle the wagons against him, and get him out of there on their own. That's them stacking the deck against a bootlick whose usefulness has been expended. You know, I'm kind of hard-pressed to think of any time when there's been a politician, short of the presidency, where they've actually been talking publicly about how do we get this guy out of here if he refuses to resign. Here's all the mechanisms and ways that could be used to get this guy out of office involuntarily. That shows you what the white media wants. They want to see this guy run out of there so they can say, finally, Eric Adams out of there. Now let's look back at the rise and fall of Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD. You can tell that they're already getting that ready. I'll bet you they've already come up with some graphics and such. They've already been spitballing what the copy for that would be. Let's get that narration underway so we can talk about how this guy went from being a little punk in Brooklyn or over there in the Bronx to already getting himself into the NYPD, where he became a bigger criminal, and then he went to New York City Hall, where he committed the biggest crimes of all. You know that's what they're doing. And the white media is calling this an historic indictment. Interesting language, because when it comes to something negative, they love to make black people the face of that. Officer Eric Adams went from being the second black mayor of New York to being the first federally indicted mayor of the city. The first mayor of New York to be charged with federal crimes is how the white media framed that. So that means he's not the first New York mayor to be charged with a crime, just the first to be charged with a federal crime. But of course, most people aren't going to catch the nuance of how the white media words it, and that's deliberate. People are going to fixate on the part that the white media emphasizes, which is that Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD has been charged with a crime. But a lot of folks are going to miss the nuance about how this is a federal indictment. See, Rudy Giuliani's been charged numerous times at the state level, but for some strange reason, we haven't been hearing the white media bandying his name about very often during this story. Now, you would think they would go ahead and bring up the fact that America's mayor, he's also a guy who's had a number of charges brought against him, but no, it's a matter of, let's make this sound like it's unprecedented. The only thing unprecedented is that it's federal charges, not that it's a New York mayor who's been charged, but still. I also find it interesting that the white media is choosing now to remind people that Officer Eric Adams was referring to himself as the future of the Democratic Party. Because I, for one, never heard anyone talking about what offices they thought this guy was going to be good for after he got through screwing up the New York mayor's office. No talk about a Senator Eric Adams, no talk about him being governor, though in New York usually it's more prestigious to be mayor of New York City than it is to be governor of the state. Certainly nobody would ever refer to this guy as having presidential potential. So when the white media talks about Eric Adams bestowing the title of Future of the Party on himself, I literally have no clue what he or they are talking about. These bootlicks always think that they're the belle of the ball, the star of the show, because these white power brokers and donors gas their empty heads up and tell them how much potential they have. And these fools actually believe it. But as I've always taught you, white society loves a cruel prank, especially one that takes a long time to pay off. And as long as they've had the goods on Officer Eric Adams, they've just been guffawing and high-fiving each other. And every time they saw him snickering under their breath, they're going, oh, this idiot, he doesn't have a clue, but just wait for the day. I'll bet you they just loved it. Absolutely loved it. They always do. They savor that stuff. Now, the most indicative sign that Officer Eric Adams was dirty as hell is the fact that he's a cop. Gee, who was the last major New York political figure to get hit with federal charges? Oh yeah, Bernie Kerik. And who was he? He was New York's police commissioner under Rudy Giuliani. He wound up pleading guilty to failure to pay taxes and lying to White House officials during a failed nomination to be Homeland Security Secretary. It was Donald Trump who decided to pardon him for that. So this is what it means to be a police officer in America, and it's definitely what it means to be a cop in New York City. And don't even try to give me that he's a former cop stuff. That's like saying someone's a former child molester. Once you've been on the wrong side of the law, you really don't get to come back from that. And don't even try the, well, there's some good cop stuff. Because you don't see these good cops doing anything to clean up the bad departments they're in, so they're irrelevant. If you're not a dirty cop in New York or anywhere else, then you don't get promoted, because part of being a ranking police officer is assuring the dirty politicians and businessmen that you'll protect them from being arrested for the dirt they do. All of these guys go into law enforcement because it allows them to have a safe, cushy job where they get to collect a paycheck and then eventually a state-sponsored pension on the taxpayer's dime after only 20 years. Many of them then go on to work some second quote-unquote career, usually in security or something adjacent to law enforcement, and after a life of crime, they retire and get 3 retirements: their cop pension, their second career, and Social Security. That's what being a cop is like in America, and as a nice bonus, they get to engage in whatever level of anti-black criminality and violence they want because they're protected by other criminals in the government and praised and adored by the corrupt white media. Officer Eric Adams came in the door talking trash about black people, doing the "what about black on black crime" line. He appointed a police commissioner who was a shameless proponent of stop and frisk, and he actually attempted to whitewash the murder of Jordan Neely. So Officer Eric Adams was going overboard from the jump to prove to his white donors that he would be the black face of white control. And he was just so sure that they would have his back. But if there's one thing black people ought to know by now, and that bootlicks will never learn, it's that white supremacy doesn't know the definition of gratitude. Certainly not where black people are concerned. And bootlicks will never realize the definition of stupid. Officer Eric Adams thought they made him a police captain because he's smart. No, they did it precisely because he's an idiot. A useful idiot. But it seems somebody thinks his usefulness has come to its end. And that was the same reason they selected him to be their stalking horse for mayor. They had some dirt they wanted done, and they knew putting a black face out front would be a good distraction. It's the old Obama playbook. And he did their bidding, reinforced their position, and this is how they repay him. Couldn't have happened to a nicer clown. Now, all those pork-chop preachers and civic misleaders who were praising this guy and backing him for mayor and telling the usual lies about how he was going to represent black New Yorkers, and they were only too glad to have their picture taken with him, New York is infested and absolutely overrun with bootlicks and sellouts who make it their business to betray and attack the black community every chance they get. Well, all those corrupt and crumbling bootlicks who were supporting Adams, they better stand by his side now. That's where they need to be. They've vouched for this creep, so that means their reputations, such as they are tarnished by this too. But let's be honest. The slime who were endorsing him 3 years ago, they didn't have any credibility or respectability from the people to begin with. They're slaves to white power. Everybody recognizes they're all a bunch of bought and paid for tools. The black citizens of New York don't respect these mouthpieces or Officer Eric Adams. Meanwhile, Officer Adams is claiming that he's going to fight these charges and continue fighting for the people of New York. Well, from the sound of things, if he's expecting the citizens to rally behind him, he's got another thing coming.
God disgrace to all black people in this city. The things that you have done are unconscionable. You hurt our schools. Our streets are dirty. Our children are harassed by the police. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You can shush me all you want, but the people are with us. And this is not a black day. This is a justice day.
You know, if I were Officer Adams' legal counsel, I would advise him to demand a change of venue, because a New York jury would be too prejudiced against him for him to get a quote-unquote fair trial, mostly because the people of the city know what a scumbag he is. Officer Adams' biggest problem is that the people of the city recognize he was never serving them, he was only serving himself. His legal team claims that there's perfectly reasonable explanations for the gifts and perks that he got from these interested parties, but obviously nobody's going to have any sympathy for him. Bootlicks are always reassuring themselves that they're so smart and that massa loves them. It doesn't take much to get over on them. They keep telling themselves how clever they are, that they learned the system, that they're just so sharp and they figured out how to navigate their way around white power, and why, if only the rest of Black America would merely just start kissing masses behind too, and telling white power that we're not angry about anything and that it's all our fault, why, we could get some perks and butter biscuit crumbs just like these bootlicks do. And then, when this inevitably happens, the bootlicks suddenly start trying to talk like they've been down with the black community all along. That's what Officer Adams is trying. But you see that from the white media's coverage and commentary about this, they're already heading him off at the pass on that one. They're making it clear, well, he's trying to basically talk as if he's with the people, as if he represents them. That doesn't mean anything. Yeah, they're already making it very clear to everybody, yeah, he's guilty. Y'all need to be seeing him as guilty. They didn't do this with Rudy Giuliani. They gave him sympathy, but then again, Rudy Giuliani isn't black. So this is what's happening to Officer Eric Adams these days. He's being raked over the coals by the very same white power structure whose interest he worked to advance. And while we can all enjoy the schadenfreude of this moment, let's not kid ourselves. These white authorities aren't indicting Officer Adams to do us any favors. They were the ones who allowed him to be a cop in the first place, and also allowed him to remain out there doing their dirty work against black New Yorkers for so long in the first place. Because that's the real crime here. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out here than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Liddell Brown, Nicholas Moore, Black Truth United, Andrew Lewis, and James Stiles. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.